Today on the Roundhouse, we are learning more about the Cass Scenic Railroad. All aboard!
In days past, the Roundhouse was where the railroad worker united with the steam locomotive, each to prepare for the journey ahead. Today, it's where we examine the history, the industry, the machines, the hobby, and the passion behind railroading. News, interviews, stories, and more. So climb aboard. This is The Roundhouse.
Welcome to the Roundhouse. I'm your host, Nick Gozarak, and this is episode number 128 of our Trains and Railroading podcast. We're talking about everything in the industry and the hobby. You name it, and we discuss it. Today, we're going to West Virginia, Mountain Mama, Cass Scenic Railroad. We're talking to the Director of Communications, Walter Scriptunas II, about this tourist line that uses shays and other logging locomotives to take people into the wilderness, about the history of the line, and some of the cool things that they have planned with this soon-to-be-completed expansion or connection between Durbin and Cass. Before we get to that, though, I want to make a point to thank those of you who are supporting the Roundhouse on Patreon. Folks like Nicholas McLean, who just became a historian, and Dark White 73, who became a loco fitter. For as little as $1 a month, you are going a long way to supporting the show, and you get cool perks like these shoutouts and early access to podcast episodes at patreon.com/theroundhouse. I'd also like to thank Strasburg Railroad for sponsoring today's episode. You can check out their mechanical services and see how they might be able to help with your restoration by emailing mechanical@strasburgrailroad.com. Our guest today is the Director of Communications for the Durbin and Greenbrier Valley Railroad, which oversees the operations of the Cass Scenic Railroad. Please welcome to the Roundhouse, Mr. Walter Scriptunas II.
Hi, Nick. It's great to be here at the Roundhouse. Excited to join you.
It's great to have you here at the Roundhouse. Provide us an overview of the railroad.
So Cass is a former logging railroad. We cover 11 miles to the top of Bald Knob, the third highest point in West Virginia. On a clear day, it offers views into the state of Virginia, spectacular views. It's just our primary power is shay locomotives. They are still working hard or harder than they did in regular service. So it's a bucket list item for most rail fans, and we have visitors from all around the world. So it's a pretty special place.
Let's start with the topic of views and the land itself, because as I understand it, the land and the railroad is owned by the state and is a state park, and the Durbin and Greenbrier Valley is the designated operator of the railroad. Is that correct?
That's correct. The state owns all the locomotives, the park itself, the town, and the Durbin and Greenbrier Valley, we oversee the day-to-day operations of the railroad. So we handle maintenance and track maintenance, locomotive maintenance, and keep the trains running, basically.
How did the park come into fruition initially?
The Division of Natural Resources previously oversaw the railroad operations for the first 51 years of the park. And they were ready for a change, and they wanted, because you constantly had new superintendents coming in, they had a new way of doing things, and the final 10 or 15 years, things just weren't going as well as they hoped. So they were ready for a change. So they looked for other vendors to potentially operate the railroad, and Durbin and Greenbrier Valley was contacted. So so things worked out well, and for the past 6 years now, we've been operating the railroad, and business has increased. We've done a lot of cool things. More locomotives are running now than ever before. So the future is bright at Cass, and it's really exciting time.
Let's go all the way back to the beginning. What is the history of the railroad itself?
So Cass was founded in about 1901 as a logging railroad. It was serviced by the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway. So as they made their way up the Greenboro line, they got to Cass. The lumber industry was flourishing, and they started building track up the mountain. So that lasted until 1960, until all the trees were logged, and they had started to scrap the line. So, and a group of rail fans really wanted to save Cass, really wanted to make it a museum. So they went to the state legislature, presented this crazy plan, and it wasn't that well received at first, but people warmed up to the idea, and here we are.
Part of what's impressive with the preservation of it is there's the railroad itself, but then there's all of these different buildings that have been preserved as well that tell the history of the area as a whole. And it's really neat to see that those survive. What are some of the structures that you have still standing today?
Yeah, that's right. The railroad is a fantastic element, obviously. That's what we're here for, the trains. But what makes Cass special is having the entire town intact. So we have company houses, which can be rented for weekend stays or week stays. Um, the town jail is still in existence, the mayor's office, the gigantic company store, which is now a gift shop. Unfortunately, structures such as the depot, um, or the original depot, has since it was um, had an arson fire back in the 70s, but it was rebuilt, and the remnants of the mill still remain, although unfortunately in decay. But most of the main elements of the town are still there.
Part of that atmosphere that's created is the fact that there's this really impressive roster that you've established over the decades of logging equipment with a particular emphasis on Shay locomotives. Were Shays part of the mainstay of Cass when it was a logging railroad? Because I understand that a lot of the Shays that are here now have come from other sources.
That's correct. Yeah, the Cass operation was pretty much 100% a Shay operation. They experimented with a two-truck Climax, but I don't believe they had purchased it, but it was never actually even delivered to Cass. So they loved their Shays then, and they still love them now. And yeah, two of our locomotives are original to the lumber line. Shay number 5, which came to Cass in 1905 and is the oldest Shay in operation in the United States. And we also have Shay number 4, which also operated for the lumber company.
What is the significance of having the Shays today? I imagine that, honestly, under your operatorship, that the track is in better shape than it probably was when it was a common carrier. So what utility do they serve now?
The Shays, they're still pushing heavy loads up and down the steep grades, and they're doing it every day reliably. They're like the Cadillac of geared steam locomotives. They're able to climb these 9 to 11% grades with ease. And like I say, they're working harder than they did even in operation. Back in the lumber days, you pushed empties up the hill. Now they're pushing fully loaded passenger cars up and up the hill. So it's impressive, and they're still chugging right along.
A few months ago, we were talking to Bethan Marr, the executive director of Western Forest Industries Museum, which is involved with the Mount Rainier Scenic Railroad. And one of the questions I asked her, which I'll ask you as well, is with so much of your fleet being concentrated on this sub niche of a niche, steam locomotives being hard enough to service, but Shays, Climaxes, Heislers being even more unique. What are some of the challenges that are faced when you're doing locomotive rebuilds and restorations?
Okay, yeah, the locomotives are constantly under stress, and we have super sharp curves on the line, so they're constantly breaking, geared teeth, and but we have a very talented shop crew who's able to, repair these things like almost instantly. It's amazing what they can do. Um, But for the most part, they're extremely reliable locomotives, and we do very well with them. And it's just amazing to watch them go, and they're incredible machines. And of course, we have a Climax now, a three truck Climax, and we also have a three-truck Chrysler. So we have all three of the main geared locomotives right at Cass, which is pretty special too.
Let's talk about the Climax because that's the most recent success story, having been completed in late 2019. And that had a very long road to restoration. And as I understand it, part of being able to make the switch to operatorship under D&GV helped to cross the finish line.
Yeah, so the poor Climax, it had a rough life. It was, ridden hard. It was in its final years of operation. It was in a rear-end collision. Some of the frame was bent. It got to Cass. The restoration was started, then it was in the shop fire in the 70s. So that kind of killed that first restoration attempt. So it was moved to the deadline, sat for about 30 more years. Then the Mountain State Railroad Logging Historical Association came up with the idea to restore it. So they built a restoration shop behind the Cass locomotive shop, and they drug it in there. Spent about 15 years tearing it apart, remachining literally every single piece of the locomotive, rebuilding parts. There was no cab. We had a replacement boiler that was found out west that was actually an original Climax boiler, but it found itself being used at a greenhouse. So it had an interesting history. A new cab was built, new coal bunker, new water tender. So Mountain State transferred the locomotive, the final leg of the restoration, over to Durbin and Greenbrier Valley. The Cass shop crew, finished putting the boiler on, all the plumbing, pressure vessel stuff, and it runs beautifully. We don't get to use it as much as we like, but we plan to start using it a decent amount on the Greenbrier line, and we're looking forward to that. It's an impressive locomotive. It is loud. It sounds great. Has great stack talk. It's impressive to watch, and it's definitely become a fan favorite.
Having grown up near Corey, only about 40 minutes away from Corey, I feel contractually obligated to say that that is my favorite. But I will confess that Shea number 6, the Western Maryland 6, is growing on me the more I look at photos and videos of it. That is quite an impressive beast in and of itself.
It is definitely a beast, and when you're standing right next to it, it is very impressive compared to all the other Shays.
And do you have a particular favorite of your own, Walter?
Oh man, that's tough. So the very first locomotive I got into at Cass, I was about 4 months old, and it was Shay number 5. So obviously, I probably have the closest connection to that engine, but they're all so unique. It's just hard to say a favorite. They're all like your child, They're just all fun to be around, and they're all special.
A big restoration that you have going on right now is with BC&G number 4. What is the story of that locomotive?
Yeah, Nick. So we actually have a normal steam locomotive at Cass, not a geared locomotive. So we have the Buffalo Creek and Gully number 4. It is a 280 locomotive, and it is currently undergoing restoration. But the key part of the restoration is we need a new boiler for it. So we are raising money for the boiler. It's going to be about $675,000. We've raised about $150,000 of that. So if you want to learn more information or donate, go to steamthe4.com. Once complete, the locomotive will be used on the Greenbrier line. So it's gonna be really cool seeing a Shay locomotive pull out of the Cass Depot and a Rod locomotive right behind it. So it's gonna be pretty cool.
It'll be nice too because the number 4 is such an iconic locomotive when it comes to West Virginia short line railroading. Also because it has one of the most amusing nicknames that I've ever heard given to a steam locomotive, and that is Slobberface. How does it have a name like Slobberface?
So it is a saturated steam locomotive. It's not superheated, and it had this habit of, basically drooling out of the front of the smoke box. So it always had this, um, I guess stuff just coming out of the smoke box, and it looked like it was drooling. So yeah, it's a interesting nickname, and I've been trying to think of ways to utilize that, maybe with kids' products or something at the railroad. But yeah.
Do you anticipate with this restoration that it will continue to slobber, or do you think there's going to be ways of sealing the door to prevent that?
That's a good question. I think it might slobber still, so I guess we will find that out soon.
The Strasburg Railroad is an institution in the heritage railroad industry, and its mechanical services department is proud to lead the way. With the knowledge and experience that has created one of the most reliable steam railroading experiences in the country, the Strasburg Railroad is excited to offer their expertise to the rest of the industry. Strasburg's professional team provides consulting and technical assistance to take your steam locomotive or railcar project from idea to finished product. They stand behind their work and always strive to meet their customers' needs for quality, historic accuracy, and reliability at a price that is fair. Unlike many competitors, they feature a fully equipped boiler, railcar, and machine shop, so the work gets done in-house, helping you to get more for your money. Send your inquiries to mechanical@strasburgrailroad.com and let the professionals get to work for you. You mentioned there being only a few months old when you had your first exposure. I feel like my knowledge of you goes back all the way to railpictures.net in the 2000s and seeing your abundance of really wonderful photos coming out of Cass. What's been your history with the railroad, starting all the way from when you were 5 months to now here you are in your 30s working for the railroad?
So yeah, I basically grew up at Cass. I lived 3.5 hours away in Charleston, but my grandparents and parents both had a place right in town. So I was constantly going to Cass about every other weekend when I was a kid. So I grew up around it. Basically it was my playground. I didn't have Thomas the tank engine; I had the real thing. So it was a good childhood, and it just stayed with me through all these years, and I'm glad that, I'm able to give back now and help out the place and, bring it to the help show it to the world, show it off. That's what it's all about.
The element of photography, I feel like that's a really strong component of cast past and present when you say is the showcasing it visually.
That is exactly right. The railfan weekends are iconic. They've been around as long as the railroad. So they're just, the whistles, the sound, the amount of locomotives you have. It's just incredible to be there. When you arrive at Cass in May, the start of the season, it's Railfan weekend. You go down to the shop, see all these locomotives and steam. It just brings a smile to your face. It's like summer's arrived. When I was little, school was about to end. Things were going to be great. So, yeah, and you see so many people and make so many great friends. And yeah, the Railfan weekends are special, and I'm happy to be a part of that now, like organizing our photography events. And I really have a lot of fun doing that. I put a lot of effort into it, always trying to give some people something new, and it is a lot of fun.
Let's turn our attention to the extension or connection between Durbin and Cass. That's been a long time in the making, and we're finally nearing the golden spike moment. But what has been the history of that project?
So the line was washed out during the 1985 flood. It was a massive flood. It rolled through the area. It basically, when I say it wiped out the line, it wiped it out. It cut out curves. There's literally the rails were in the water, road bed was missing. and that was the 15-mile line from Cass to Durbin. So it sat for many years. In 2015, the idea was, when Durbin and Greenbrier Valley took over Cass, the idea was to put the line back in service. So our small track crew got to work with their little excavator, started chipping away at it, about 5 or 6 guys, sometimes less. And, you know, 5 years later, we're about to open it. And it's something I never dreamed of seeing happen. I looked at photos from, the 70s and 80s, these rail fan trips, and I'm like, oh, that was so cool, but I'll never get to see it because it's just not going to happen. It was just one of those things, like the big boy being restored, that magnitude. But a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. A lot of rattlesnakes down there, so it's been a heck of a journey. But here we are. We're about to open it, and it is a very exciting time for us.
What would you say is the significance of it to somebody who's maybe not from the area? What is something that having this line in place is going to offer in addition to what you already have?
The mountain line going to Bald Knob, obviously incredible. It's beautiful, all year long, but we can only run up there basically May through October. If the weather gets too rough in the winter, snow drifts, and it's just not safe to run on the mountain in the winter. The Greenbrier line opens up so many possibilities with special events, year-round operation, and it's really going to change the face of Cass. It gives people more options. We're going to be able to do new events. It's so exciting to think about because there's so much potential there, and it just makes me smile thinking about it.
We're recording this in late September of 2022, and you told me before we started recording that you just yesterday received the last load of steel for a bridge that is serving essentially as the final link to making this happen. Is that correct?
Yes. So the line has technically been finished except for 100 feet for the past year and a half. So we have been waiting for the final connection, which is a bridge. It goes across a little trout stream called Trout Run. The bridge abutments were installed a couple years ago. We had been waiting for the bridge steel for way too long, but with everything, supply chain issues, we're holding up progress. But finally, it's like an early Christmas present. The bridge steel finally arrived. We are very excited. A week from now, we plan to roll it up the Greenbrier, install it. Then it's going to be about 6 weeks of work to officially complete the bridge. So once that's finished, we are ready. We're running trains to Durbin, so it's exciting.
You mentioned the ability to do further events later into the operating season as a result of this. What are some of the events that you enjoy hosting throughout the year?
We want to bring back one of the most requested things is dinner trains, and it is very difficult to run a dinner train up to Whitaker station, which we previously did in the past. So we hope to run dinner trains to Durbin on the Greenbrier line with diner cars. I envision moonlight specials, Halloween trains, fall harvest trains, Christmas trains. It's just, there's so many neat things. We're still going to continue our Parade of Steam event in June, which has blossomed into this incredible spectacle. And the past few years, our entire parking lot has been full. We have overflow parking filled up, thousands of people at Cass to see our locomotives on this grand stage rolling through town. It's very fun.
I feel like photos out of Cass of the locomotive races and the parades that you offer, the stuff of legend, because it's so rare in the U.S. to see more than, let's say, 3 steam locomotives in operation at a single time. And the fact that you're able to pull off, in some cases, 5 or more is really quite incredible. And a testament to, A, the amount of steam motive power you have, and B, the cycle that you're able to keep them on to keep them running.
Yeah, we know that cycle's not always going to continue. We're just in a good place right now where just everything happens to be running at the same time. So next year we are shooting for 7 locomotives in steam for the parade, and that will be very, very cool. So definitely look at our social media early next spring, sometime in June, usually Father's Day weekend. We will hold this parade of steam event, and it is definitely not one to be missed.
What are some of the things that people are taking away from the experience of riding a train at Cass?
I always love seeing the kids smile. That's always the fun part. Hearing feedback from customers, greeting people from around the world. We have visitors, from China, often Japan, Germany, Europe. It's so, so cool just to see, everybody coming to this little town of Cass in the middle of nowhere. We have no cell service. It's really, really neat.
The other element in play in terms of the people that you have there is I get a distinct feeling when I look at your social media that there is this strong sense of work family, that you have the fans who have long history there, you have people in the mechanical department, historians that have this really tight bond to one another. I saw some tributes to members of that family who recently passed away, and it just seems like there's a lot of looking out for one another as a team, both in terms of your D&GV crew as well as those who play a significant role in the promotion and preservation of this place.
Yeah, a lot of our employees just really respect the history of Cass, and most of them have grown around it, up around it. Their, family members have worked here. They grew up around it. So it's just that small town charm you have, and it's just they really take pride in their work and they love it. They love what they do. They wouldn't like to do anything else. So it's really cool. And they all, if you've been to Cass, the engineers all have their unique whistling styles, which has kind of became the iconic, sound of Cass over the years. Records have been made. It's a really neat thing we have going, and it's really special.
We've talked a lot about Cass, but obviously the Durbin and Greenbrier Valley is a lot of other elements of operation. What are some of the other pieces to the D&GV as a whole company?
So yeah, we also operate a popular excursion train out of Elkins called the New Tigert Flyer. It's a 4.5 hour round trip to a place called the High Falls of Cheat, which is a beautiful, beautiful waterfall. Um, they are. It's a diesel powered train with climate controlled cars. It has a lounge car. It's a really, really, really fun ride through the up through the valley. So it's very neat. And we also operate freight trains. So we have a short line operation that operates from Tigert Junction to Beelington to Elkins. And a lot of those trains are powered by F units, which is almost unheard of these days. So that's always neat to see a F unit pulling a, sometimes 30-car freight train down to Elkins. So it's pretty neat.
You must have crews that really love what they do, because F units are not the most conducive to being able to do local switching and so forth. So they must really love those locomotives if they're willing to put off with the shortcomings of a full car body.
Yeah, that is true, and we've upgraded recently to newer 50-year-old diesels. So it's been, yeah. So it's definitely a challenge at times. Yeah, I agree.
But it's amusing to be able to have that as something that's keeping the history alive, aside from where one is specifically highlighting the technology through Cass and even through the Durbin rocket, which is such a cute little operation. Cute. I don't know if cute is the way that people mostly describe it, but every time I think of it, cute is the first word that comes to mind.
You know, it is cute. I totally admit it is very cute. So, and the rocket's kind of going to be phased out with the opening of the Greenbrier River line. So we'll be running full round trips from Cass to Durbin and back. But if ridership demands, we might bring that back in some capacity in the future. Because departing from Durbin on this little trip, it's a lot of fun. Pulled by the Heisenberg climax. That's how that line right there, the rocket, is how Durbin and Greenbrier Valley started. So it's kind of like our child, our baby.
That climax number 3 is a key element to sort of what makes that cute. And now that it's undergoing a restoration, eventually then you'll have 2 climaxes in operation.
And they're both from the same logging railroad, the Moore and Keppel. So it's rare to have one climax. So there's so few in the world, but to have 2 in the same place, it's pretty mind blowing, honestly.
Probably not, since they were built at Corey, or at least the 30s and 40s in the heyday of logging railroads, would one see so many in one place in steam.
Exactly.
So with all this excitement going on, at the end of the day, Walter, what do you enjoy most about the work that you and your team are doing and bringing this history of logging railroad to the masses?
I feel like we're doing the impossible some days. We're just our small crew keeping up this amount of locomotives, the track. It's so nice, and running up the mountain reliably every day. Obviously, there's issues that pop up with like any steam locomotive, but it's just incredible to see. And when an issue happens, our guys rally, get things fixed, and we're rolling the next day. So it makes you smile most days.
The website to check out is mountainrailwv.com. You can see the upcoming events for Scenic Railroad, Durbin Rocket, New Tiger Flyer, all of their excitement for the season on mountainrailwv.com. Walter, thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast today. It's been great to have you along for the ride.
Thanks.
And now, the question of the day.
Last time on the Roundhouse, we were talking to Dave Drury, the voice of Pentrek's legendary home movies about different railroads from across America, and even a few internationally. And Dave's voice was a constant fixture in those presentations, which led to the question, what's one of your favorite Railfan VHS tapes? And I specified VHS tapes because I think a lot of us have nostalgia for those tapes, or DVDs. But I got a lot of interesting responses from you guys, and I'm going to share a few of them with you here. First, from the roundhousepodcast.com, Nick Huntington writes, favorite VHS? Pentrek's Burlington Northern E units along the racetrack. I lived in Hinsdale, Illinois. Hinsdale? Sorry if I'm getting that wrong. In the late 60s, early 70s, only a few blocks from what was the Burlington at the time. My dad rode the train back and forth to work downtown, and I have vivid memories of the sights and sounds of the E's accelerating out of town or roaring through with an express. The Pentrek's tape brought back a lot of memories for both me and my dad, who has since passed away. The interview with Dave Drury was even more enjoyable for me because of this. Not to mention that he is from Seattle, where we moved to from Chicagoland back in 1973. Thanks as always for enjoyable and informative podcasts. Well, thank you very much, Nick. From YouTube, Metalhead Rail Fan writes, Pentrex defined my teens years as a rail fan. It was my gateway into the more technical and videography side of the hobby after leaving my childhood behind with Thomas and Friends and I Love Toy Trains. Rypat Macrock writes, my favorite Pentrex video that I currently own and have been watching lately is Santa Fe's Pasadena subdivision. Dave's iconic voice narrating beautiful and quite cinematic footage of the classic Santa Fe passenger trains running through Pasadena and the route. And from Facebook, Frank DiStefano writes, Pentrex East Broad Top. Love the history from Lee Rainey and ride-along segments. The glory machines from Heron Rail videos probably takes top honor, though, for its glimpse of the major fallen flags from way back with a charming soundtrack and narration. And these last ones kind of go hand in hand, and I definitely agree with them here. Eric Fader writes, Does There Goes a Train count? Dean Musar writes, I didn't have much access to Railfan tapes growing up, but I remember constantly renting out There Goes a Train when I was a kid. Oh my goodness. My nostalgia for There Goes a Train is high. If you've never heard of it, it's really funny and entertaining, and I believe it's on YouTube. Since the podcast is over, you should definitely go check that out on YouTube, but not before briefly checking out patreon.com/The Roundhouse and seeing if you can support the podcast for as little as $1 a month. I'd appreciate even if you could take a quick peek over there. Your question of the day for this episode is, what panel discussions would you like to see take place on the Roundhouse? For 2023, I want to try something new. I want to do more conversations with a multitude of folks, usually about 3 folks per panel, on a specific subject, whether it be historical or tourist railroading or what it's like to run a museum. I want to hear from you guys as to what you would like to see covered on the show and who you think might be good panelists for such topics of conversation. The key is looking for things that can involve talking to a multitude of people, because I think that's going to be fun. Thank you for listening. Links to social media are on theroundhousepodcast.com, and I appreciate you guys for tuning in as always. Remember that the Roundhouse is our house.